Welcome to today's episode. Today we have Dr Pepler, who is a nature enthusiast and conservation philosopher. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Could you please share your unusual background and your story and how you've gotten to this point?
Perhaps I should say, for what you're about to receive, I'm a cynic. I'm an absolute cynic. I believe the earth is doomed. But stepping back, when I was about 5, my grandfather, who was practically illiterate, he worked for the railways, would push me out of town at a little place called Robertson in a wheelbarrow because we didn't have cars, with a bottle of cold coffee. And he would show me things, where to look for edible fruit, where do the hares sleep under bushes, etc. And exactly at that stage, my interest was sparked, and it never died off. And I can say with absolute conviction that I have spent my entire life fulminating like a madman. Repent, I would shout. Stop what you're doing. And it's all been in vain, but I've never stopped. I've never stopped. I think the point I've reached now, I'd like to quote the fabulous poet, ecologist Gary Snyder. He says, "Find your place on the planet, dig in, and take responsibility from there." And this is a profound idea, in a sense that it is evenly applicable to Bill Gates and me. The problem currently is that most people cannot afford to conserve because they are so poor. We're the illustrious top layer of society. We're connected. We've, completely, we're on clouds. People in Sudan are not on clouds. They have to fight every day to survive. Which brings us to mock humility for those that have, where a friend of mine said, only the rich can afford to be poor. We can go off the grid, we can eat nice food. But how does that impact on 80% of the world that practically has nothing? And those are the people we should be concerned about, not the rich. We should be concerned about the rich for a redistribution of wealth. I hope, I'll say it to their faces, the time will come where your money will be taken and given to the poor. It'll become so bad. So prepare yourself to lose some of your money.
So then how do you relate all the knowledge that you have? Like you said, there's a lot of access that some people have that other people don't. How do you relate all of that information and make it relevant to someone on the street, a regular person, so they can understand the impacts?
The standard answer to that question is, what can I do in Stellenbosch, in my little house with a tiny garden, where the atmosphere is being ruined by 3 countries, by America, China, and India? They're screwing it up, not me. You can alleviate the sense of loss by, like Schneider says, taking responsibility for this tiny piece of earth that you stand on. Once you do that, you become a stable island in a sea of instability, of abuse, of production, of over-exploitation. You become stable, right? I decide not to buy tomatoes from Italy or go to a supermarket. The asparagus is flown in from Peru. This is a sin against nature. Those planes should be shot down. Carrying asparagus over the Atlantic Ocean for us to eat in Stellenbosch is madness. So, once you've established a little island of considered stability, I will use my bicycle before I use my car. I will recycle whatever you want. The little suite of things that you've decided on. You then tell your neighbor, you know what I've done? One neighbor will say, you're completely completely bonkers. Forget it. Are you crazy saving little bits of candle to make fire lighters or whatever? But someone will say, that's quite an interesting idea. I think I'll do the same. Another little island is formed. If you have enough islands, they form a continent. It is our duty to speak to our neighbor, our fellow human being, the drunk on the street and the business owner, to make sure that we carry this message of responsibility, taking what Schneider said, find your place on the planet, dig in, and take responsibility from there.
So I hear that, and it makes sense that we can take responsibility, but there was something you had mentioned earlier about the challenges where we have some people who have nothing and they're being expected now to look into conservation when they're worrying about their next meal. How would you get around that challenge?
I've worked in sustainable production systems in Africa all my life. It is fascinating to go to Malawi, where most of the miombo, the natural felt, has been sacrificed to dry tobacco. Thousands of square kilometers are absolutely treeless because poor farmers use the trees to cure tobacco, to give other people lung cancer. I was consulted or asked to consult for a tobacco company, which in effect I didn't want to do, tobacco. But then I realized that my function lies as a restoration ecologist to bring answers to this. We went into the veld and talked about woodlots and specifically fast-growing things like bamboo that will produce the same biomass in a year compared to 35 years for the natural habitat. I was in a village where people were dying of malnutrition. Not hunger, but they were eating the wrong food. I looked at my feet. They were standing in a sea of portulacaria. It's a weed that is super high in vitamin C. They were surrounded by what's known as marroch, by amaranthus. They were standing in a field of food, but they didn't know they could eat it. It is our duty to bring in alternatives. Instead of planting trees, planting bamboo, which will give you a multitude of building material, biomass for charcoal, whatever, and teaching people to eat the available. They simply don't know that this little plant that they all walk on is a marvelous food, So it's our duty to bring light. Karen Blixen, who wrote Out of Africa, the famous book, the Baroness Blixen, starting with I had a farm in Africa once. Anyway, Blixen said that if we shine the light of Western brilliance into the black eyes, which is not racist, but into dark eyes, we will blind them and we will instill in them a longing for darkness. We will so overwhelm them with Western that they will retreat into darkness. So it's an incredibly delicate balance of not being prescriptive, having a moral compass in what you wish to achieve, and working towards it for a long time. For a long time. These changes take decades to really come into effect. I'm very proud to have worked in Tanzania, in the Kilombero Valley, on a miombo restoration project where it had been utterly shattered by overexploitation. And it took us an incredibly long time. But we proved that you would, with the right mathematical and scientific techniques, you can replant miombo, and within 20 years it'll look exactly like it. Architecturally it'll be complete, but not totally biodiversity. But these lands can be repaired. They can be repaired if there's a will to repair them. Now, you can't plant trees all over Africa. I hate this bloody spekboom thing. Plant a spekboom because it absorbs more CO2. Plant carrots. Forget the bloody spekboom, but plant something. It can be done if there's a will, but there is a lack of will.
Do you also feel like there's firstly, there's a disconnect then, obviously, with the people, the local people, and what's available to them? But when you think back to how, humans evolved, it was us feeding off of the land that is right there, in front of us. So where did they lose that connection to the land?
They lost the connection because of an ecological term known as density dependency.
Okay.
For hundreds of thousands of years. I mean, how old is Homo sapiens? 1.5 million, give or take 500,000. There were all kinds of creatures. Lucy, Cro-Magnon, and Neanderthal. But ever since we became human, after the last fully human, fully functional, with a language, which is a very new thing, our language is about 70,000 years old. Before then, we were grunting, they were sort of grunts. But syntax only arose about 70,000 years ago. And without syntax, you cannot transfer knowledge. How do we know this? In Blombos Cave at Mossel Bay, they found, exactly at the layer of 68,000 years, a hardened hand tool for which the process was 3 days. So you couldn't say for 3 days, you had to have a language with syntax to transfer this. This revolutionized human development because this hardened weapon then went through Africa and slayed everything in front of it. It was like a tidal wave of new technology. I'm slightly lost at where I'm trying to get to now, but
disconnect. Yeah.
They were well within the carrying capacity of the land. Life was hard. You never got older than 30 years. Your teeth, usually the teeth gave way because of sand in the food. They couldn't chew anymore. They died of starvation, and then of 1,000 lions and snakes and that hit them. With the advent of so-called civilization, Mesopotamia, and there lie the proof of how we can go wrong. Uruk. Read the Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest book in the world.
Okay.
Echidnu says, we must stop cutting the cedars of Lebanon because they are going to run out. 3,500 years ago, people were worried about resources already because we lived in cities with fabulous footprints without food security. Then, inevitably, the soil gave in. And you can look at the primary civilizations all over. Who remains? China and India. Of all the primary. The Romans are gone, the Greeks are gone. Look at Italy today. How they could have been world leaders, sorry. But they're all gone. Because of collapse of resources, not political things. The Romans ran out of animals to feed the Christians to, it was just simply a resource thing. We cannot conceivably return to an existence where everybody has 15 carrots and a chicken in their garden. You have to rely on mass-produced food. But then you have a choice of what you want to buy, a critical choice. I mentioned earlier things flying all over the world for our pleasure, which is unthinkably awful, to think of a bloody pea flying from Kenya, as they do. Until the ecosystem collapses to a point of full-blown catastrophe, we will not wake up. We haven't suffered enough. not nearly. We haven't had enough droughts, we haven't had enough day zeros in Cape Town, we haven't had enough floods, but it's coming now. That we will be forced to our knees because of the revolt of the atmosphere that we have now damaged permanently.
Okay, so I hear that, but like when they were, obviously many years ago, we were worrying about the ozone layer, and it's seemingly kind of been sorted out. What lessons can we take from that to other parts of conservation? Because that, like your view is a bit cynical, but there has been a case where it has kind of worked. Yeah.
The ozone management system 20 years ago proved to be enormously successful, but it was tied to one chemical, or a handful of chemicals, a certain group of chemicals. This is soft baby food compared to subsequent what we've been pumping into the atmosphere. It's immeasurably more. It's simply a measure now of scale, not of what we put in it, but how much we put into it. 5 years ago, the Paris Accord, half the world flew with aircraft spewing CO2 to go and, can't they just have a Zoom meeting? No, they all fly, private jets. And they decided and put the final objective down that we must contain atmospheric increase by 1.5 degrees at 2050. This is due for 2028 now. It's accelerated that much. We will hit 1.5. We have hit it for a few days, but by 2028, it'll be the norm. Shiva, God and Buddha help us once we go over that line, because the event will become the norm. The flood will become the norm. The runaway fires in the Arctic will become the norm, because we can't predict anymore. No supercomputer has any idea of how to model the planet anymore. It's so chaotic that I actually don't know if my little island idea is enough to save us.
What's the little island idea?
Becoming stable and introducing other people to your concept of sustainable living. Again, it'll only happen with the rich, can't happen with the poor. There's nothing to conserve. They've got nothing to throw away.
So how would you?
Redistribution of wealth. Simple. We have exploited Africa, Indochina, Mesoamerica. It has been a European exploitation against the others. Colonialism and I don't think, and this is contentious, and I'm not even beginning to bring something like apartheid into it, but we haven't, I believe, fully compensated peoples for what we did to them 150 years ago. We haven't. Why is there such problems with the black population in America? Consistent racism, more than likely, but also the legacy of slavery that has not been fully unpacked, even to this day, even with great novels like Toni Morrison's Beloved, etc., etc. It hasn't been fully unpacked. And we haven't actually, I don't want people to go on their knees and say, please forgive me and so on. But there should be, and it's becoming the norm. King Charles is sorry to the Samoans for eating so many coconuts or whatever. I actually think Prince Charles shouldn't be in conservation. He should stick to what he's doing with his scepter. But be that as it may.
So do you feel, I hear where you're going with that point, do you feel it's a matter of certain groups of people having to worry about certain issues where they don't even have the time or the capacity to give any attention to, like, the environment?
They are quagmired in in intellectual and emotional traps.
Mm.
They're bearing a burden which they don't even understand, because it's, you know, it's been so long and it's been passed on. We cannot save everybody. We don't have the capacity to save everybody. But what we can do is to form alliances with people in need, and forming trust above all. Trust.
Yeah.
What happens to NGOs? And I'm not like the Wildlife Society, for instance, and I'm not blaming them, I'm just giving them as an example. What's happening in the world? 60 to 70% of NGO capacity is spent in trying to extend the life of the project. Instead of working on the project, they're writing proposals, which you pay for as the public. That has to stop.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some filtering form to aim money at certain people and not have them spend the rest of their life trying to keep this thing alive. We want results. We want exit points. Say, we have 5 years to do this and we want to do this, that and the other, and not have an NGO that runs forever doing nothing. And I'm not being cynical about them. Some of them are doing spectacular work. Mm. But if you think that in this country 5 years ago, at the height of the rhino poaching problem, there were 140 people gathering money for rhinos. I can tell you 138 didn't go to the rhinos, more than likely. We need to know where to put our money, no? And put our mouths where our money is. Yeah. We need to be more critical and be more severe and say, we give you 5 years, produce the following, and not have these perpetual sing-songs going on forever.
You mentioned a good way to get around some of these issues is making nature human, like humanizing nature. Could you expand a bit on that?
If you live in Sea Point or Hillbrow, on the 28th floor, you may have a balcony with a tiny little pot on it, with a little cactus on it. That is your link to nature. What you see in the Table Mountain in the distance, that's your little link. We have to form little, not have to, I think it would be a good thing, coming back to Schneider, to find that place and to dig in. Digging in by giving a little token of the world outside. A little plant that reminds me of the fynbos over there. If you live on a farm, of course, you can manage your veld properly. But we have to cater for the most abjectly isolated people. What do you do to someone in the middle of the city to bring home the nourishing effects of, salutary effects of being in nature? They've never been in nature. They can't afford to be in nature. Rewilding has become an absolute new favorite of mine. Rewilding started in London about 25 years ago with guerrilla gardening. Have you heard of these people?
No.
Absolutely magnificent criminals. These are a group of young ecologists and concerned people. I saw it on the M25 around London. There was a 2.5 kilometer stretch of island between two roads. At midnight, 50 of them come with balaclavas, and by daybreak, they have planted 4,000 lavender trees, lavender plants. Suddenly, overnight, the whole road is alive with bees and butterflies and flowers. And they expanded that. They would go to old age homes, and there would be, the next morning the pavement would be full of plants and flowers and so on. I went to London 2 years ago and stayed in Bermondsey, which has a lovely park. It's a huge thing. It's not known because it's not on the beat. 2 years prior to that, they decided to stop managing half of the park. Don't cut the grass, don't prune anything, nothing. Half of it will go wild. In 2 years, you couldn't walk through the butterflies in the heart of London. It was a cloud. What other examples? Our replanting of the Miombo in Tanzania, we can rewild the heart of a city. We can take company gardens full of squirrels and drunks and prostitutes and pigeons and say we're going to stop cutting the lawns. Watch what will happen. And I can promise you, within a year, there will be 7 new species of butterfly, 20% more birds. It does. Rewilding works. In Cambridge, 40 years ago, my supervisor and Miriam Rothschild, one of the most fearsome women, if you want to scare the hell out of me, give me an intelligent woman. I am deeply fearful of them because they are sharp. Miriam Rothschild, one of the most famous botanists, bought a farm called Lark's Rise and left it. Simply withdrew the tractors, the whole. In 5 years, trout came back into the stream, badgers appeared. The bird species list quadrupled. The insects went through the roof. Afterwards, they then said, we will keep buffers of totally untamed, wild vegetation around planting wheat. The first 5 meters will be contaminated with seeds from the weeds. We separate that. We harvest them separately. For a 15% loss in production, you get paradise. We have to think in terms of quality more than profit. To enrich our lives with biodiversity. I have a garden, and for 5 years I've never thrown away a leaf. The compost is now that deep. It is a stinking huge compost heap. In the middle of I live in Idas Valley, where there are only 2 things, vibocrete walls and doom. God, they spray everything. My garden is an aquarium of life. Snakes have come back. Shrews have come back. In my suburban garden, I live in a fabulous jungle, you know. The birds eat more than me, you know. I starve myself to keep the bloody birds alive. Can be done.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, the way I understand it, it would be complex adaptive systems, right? So an example that we can speak about that you're familiar with is the wolves in the Yellowstone Park. How would you like to break that down for people?
Yeah, I was in Yellowstone before they introduced them.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I didn't, with my own eyes, would I see it with anybody else's eyes? But be that as it may, I didn't see it, the result, but it's now become an ecological classic. It's become a standard example. Closer to home, 15, 18, 20 years ago, jackals in the Karoo National Park started eating springbok like puffnicks. Yes, as they went through 1,000 of them. They sent trucks to the Kalahari, brought 1,000 more. The jackals just got fatter. Yes, as they ate them. And it took the brilliant insight of a superb scientist, Melanie McGeoch. She's now in Australia. She was a colleague of mine. And she said, bring in apex predators, bring lions back. Oh, yes, as the door had a complete arrest. Lions, no. They brought in 7 lions, and within a week, the jackals were all salaaming. The shit stopped right there, you know, because now the system was complete. We can't bring leopard to Rondebosch Common. Talking of which, it's an open space in the middle of Cape Town. Practically every year, in the heart of Cape Town, they are discovering new species, new to science, on a piece of trodden land. And this is the hopeful part. If you look at habitat destruction, if you lose half of your habitat, you don't lose half of your species. At 95% loss, there's still something like 50% of the animal diversity there. You just have to manage it. So there is hope, if there's a will.
speaking then of hope, how do we integrate the youth in these projects and these initiatives? Because they obviously are the ones that are going to have to pull this through.
I, for many years, have taken a group of orphans from a poor community once a year into the Maria Park to introduce them. So these wild children, I mean, they're really wild. So I give them a little plastic tweezers, and I said, this is for dangerous things. Uncle! And then I take them for a walk, you know, and they pick up a scorpion and so on. Years afterwards, I will meet one of the children, or they will recognize me, I can't, and say, I remember that day. I remember that day where you gave your time to me fully and didn't speak to me like a child, but like a concerned, like my brother and sister. We do this because it keeps us living. This is why we do it. They don't forget. Secondly, we have to, I think, be slightly crazy and, as adults for children, act out the wonder of nature. Become the buffalo, be the giraffe. They don't forget. They don't forget that.
So it's actually interesting that you mentioned that even in your own home and that your own kids seeing all of this that you're doing, as much as they're aware of it, aren't as involved. So how do you're familiar with the sphere of influence, how do you relate that then to?
That's a difficult question. I'll give you an example. Because my kids not interested in my work, I put my attention elsewhere. It's not a criticism, it's a fact. Recently I became re-involved with a student organization called Eco Marties. They've been fluffing along, you know, they, you know what they look like, sort of tie and dye t-shirt, baggy pants kind of thing, you know, slightly oily hair. But this year we've had a new chairwoman, a firebrand. Eco Marties is a force to be reckoned with. They stand in front of admin saying, disinvest from Israel. They are storming the community of Stellenbosch and the university and said, repent. So, find the right vector in younger persons than you, because people are bored of listening to old people. Oh God, here we go on, you know, back to when I was young, you know, that kind of nonsense. Which brings us, of course, to the terrible fact that our lives are so short. Our lives are very short. And we tend to measure change by the length of our lifetime, which is wrong. We need to talk in ecological time. And making people understand that there is a thing like ecological time compared to personal existence. I have big difficulty at the end of my life to decide, was it worth it? All this fulminating. I mean, from the day I was 24, I mean it. I spent my entire life in service of conservation. I ran the Wildlife Society in Stellenbosch for 15 years. There were countless nights when there was one person, and I was the speaker and there was one person on a cold, rainy night. Years, but I kept it up. I don't know why I was so adamant and so focused. Hopefully, out of pure conviction, of concern that I've always had for the environment. And then I think perhaps it was worth it in the end, because I did not remain silent. No matter what I did or achieved, I never stopped being moral about it and apologizing when I was wrong. To be highly moral and say I was wrong, but let's try another way. Let's see if this works. We need, furthermore, to develop a new language, a new lexicon for politicians, so that the bastards can understand what we're talking about. They all have speech writers. They have no clue. I mean, I'm not talking about our government, but they have no clue about what's going on. You could put a penguin in their salad, they wouldn't know what it is. We need a new language to reach politics, to weave into politics, so it's understood what we're saying, perfectly understood. Not saying, oh, well, it's changing. No. If you continue, in 3 years' time, Iceland will, or Greenland's ice will recede by 50%. We guarantee you that now. This is what science tells us. The real complexity lies in my definition of nature conservation. Nature conservation is not a science, but a multidisciplinary management system, but above all, it is about people. Not about whales, it's about people. The apex.
Yeah.
That's where conservation lies.
So then how do you relate that to the politicians then? We went on it before. Sure.
The inherent problem with democracy is that 5-year terms are not enough to effect change. What happened in America when Trump became president? He spent the first month writing executive orders undoing what Obama did. Every 5 years we reinvent the whole view of the world. We need benign dictators, like Kagame, for instance, in Rwanda. I've been to Rwanda many, many times. Kagame is a dictator. He's technically a dictator. But what a dictator he is. He has brought a country from genocide to a jewel in public management. You go anywhere in Rwanda and say, are you a Hutu or Tutsi? They say, no, sir, we are Rwandan. He's broken those barriers of us and them completely by being consistent. He's been in power for since 94. You cannot believe what he's achieved. I'm not pleading for dictatorship, but we have to have noble and true leaders that lead from the heart and not from the mind, because this is how we lead. We sweet and things, we appoint buddies. We must get away from that. You know what? Many years ago I was at a Cheetah Foundation meeting. I had to say something. Who was my table mate? Sam Nujoma, the previous president, who'd always been seen as a sort of a bungling, politician. He took my breath away. He had, in the last years of his premiership, a sort of government meeting, a bosberaad. They go to a farm and decide on policy and what have you. The whole cabinet went down to a white farmer near Keetmanshoop, and they got talking. That night he fired his Minister of the Environment and appointed the farmer. That's what we need to do. Fire someone from, hopefully, a rogue party and put the right person down there. It was an enormous test of statesmanship. He was sort of sacrificing his whole political stability by firing a black minister and putting a white farmer in there. But he knew the man could do the work.
So with the wins that they have in Rwanda in terms of that approach with a certain type of leader, in terms of the effects on the environment, what can we take from those lessons there?
We can take from those lessons that we need to manage our own conservation areas properly. When last have we been to Kruger National Park?
Oh, wow.
It's a wasteland. There are no speed control. people are driving over chameleons and dead tortoises. The camps are, and I hope the guys forgive me for this, but it's not what it used to be. Table Mountain is subsidizing, because it's a national park, the cable car and the park is subsidizing, cross-subsidizing a lot of other places. They need to become independent and self-sustaining, because they're not at the moment. If you go to Yellowstone National Park, it's if you haven't been, it's absolutely electrifying. You drive up to the gate in a big cheesy car. I said, give me a small car. God, it was the side of Wimbledon Centre Court. I couldn't see over the bonnet. Anyway, driving in. Smokey the bear and Smokey's wife stands at the gate. Young guys with a ranger hat and epaulets. And they look at they say, you're not American. I say, no, I'm not. And they looked at me and said, you've no idea what you're going to see today. That's the kind of thing you want. Go to Kruger Park. I mean, it takes you 5 hours to just get a stamp on something. Put bright-eyed people there. You have a captive audience. Capture them right at the gate and say, you are going to see things now that you've never seen before, even if it's a lie. People go, ooh, yes, you know, immediately there's energy. We need to bring energy back into conservation, I think, too.
So obviously with that approach, then you see there being space for social media and all of that to push the narrative?
I'm old, careful now. Social media obviously has its functions. It also has a plethora of dysfunctions, you know, of fake news, which is the biggest danger. With AI coming in, we're on very thin ice. But if media is, how shall I put it? If media is, before its launch, before its release, is considered with objectives that is hoped to be achieved, then media today is fabulous. Fabulous. The speed at which things can travel. I mean, it's viral immediately. You know, crocodile eating ostrich, ostrich eating crocodile, you know, it's around the world. You know, from memes, I mean, you get the same meme from 10 friends in the same morning because it's whop, it's just there. Yeah. Perhaps we should think, and this is what you're doing, is to package not rambling octogenarians like me, but powerful, punchy, relevant, considered information, and not just feeding the monster because it needs to be fed. Because you need to feed media to keep it alive. You will know that. You know, don't post. People leave. You know, you lose your audience. So it's a time to objectivize what we want to do. Say, this is what we aim to do with this podcast, videos, groen, whatever. But then, without monitoring, it becomes senseless. We need to find ways to see if our podcast is successful, not only by people listening to it, but does it have any outfall? Does anything happen after this? So within media, I think the focus needs to be highly narrowed if you want to have a specific message, and not talk about fashion when you talk about climate change. And to have it highly structured. Really, if you think, writing anything, a letter, an email, a story has a beginning and a middle and an end. And media should be constructed with those three. It has a beginning and a middle and an end. Can't go on forever, but now there is a convention that structures your argument, and then you'll have success. Okay. And not the scatter, you know. Here's another interesting fact about the tortoise in May, you know. Who gives a shit about the tortoise?
But what
relevant.
If, I hear that, but what if we're looking at the concept of planting a seed in the beginning? Because a lot of that structured content, unless someone is already interested in it or even knows anything about it, would they even care to see that? So I feel like what you're saying makes sense at some point, but like right now.
I know, it's an idealized view.
Yeah.
Let me give you this thought. If you can bring home this elementary concept, what you do to nature, you do unto yourself.
So what would be your one-liner to the world as we wrap up?
A one-liner or one word?
One-liner.
Take responsibility for your existence. Simple as that. Take responsibility for this imprint that you leave on the earth. Because, metaphorically, we don't farm with sheep, we don't farm with peaches, we don't farm with cattle, we farm with soil, the life-giving soil. This sounds like hippie Woodstock 1969, give me spots on the apples but leave me the birds and the bees, says Joni Mitchell. Nonetheless, it is paramount to make people aware of their responsibility. I'm serious. It sounds very simplistic, but Hundertwasser was a particularly bad artist in Germany, but he said something incredibly true. You are on earth, and therefore you shall behave. Behave yourself.
Love that. Thank you so much.